Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the fourth episode of Authors Interviews. And today I'm going to be interviewing Jon Davies, who is the author of this novella, Muscle, if that's coming clearly, people. How are you, John?
I'm very well, thanks, Aaron. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming on. With Muscle, what sort of prompted you to write it?
Um, I think the initial idea came from it started off as a short story, and I think I might have just about completed the first draft of it, and then it just got parked to one side, and it was probably about 15 pages long, um, and I wanted to just write something about a man preparing for a fight. Essentially, that was it. That was just the first kind of idea that came along. Just jumped into my head and thinking about what would happen to him sort of physically. You'd have the physical preparations, but also the kind of mental side of it as well. What would be going on. And then I kind of got to the point of, well, that's an interesting idea, but why would he be fighting? Who would he be fighting? Is this about a boxer? Is it about a martial artist? And then the idea sort of drifted then on to becoming more of a crime novel, and making him a bouncer and involved in this feud with a gangster. And I think those influences came largely from the 90s and so on. I'm a sort of Gen Xer, so for me, the 90s were like the pinnacle of all kind of culture and film and everything else like that, and that sort of thing. And during the 90s, sort of probably around about sort of mid to late 90s, it's quite a good time for crime fiction in the UK. There were a lot of reissues. So you had the reissues like the Ted Lewis novels, they were being republished. The Richard Stark novels were reissued. There was a massive interest in kind of gangsters in general, overall, which I think had been prompted by the death of Ronnie Cray around about that sort of time as well. Yeah. So people were very interested in that kind of side of things. There's lots of documentaries, lots of British films being made about crime, kind of in the run into the kind of Cool Britannia type stuff as well. So I think I kind of drew on all those sort of influences, all those kind of memories from those times, and the kind of memories of going out as well to nightclubs and going out drinking and so on, and some of the things that you kind of saw or heard about kind of on the fringes. And it all sort of fed into Muscle then. And once I decided to make it about a bouncer and on that kind of club scene with a crime aspect to it, it all started to fall into place then as the short story.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading it, the fight at the end, I mentioned this in my review of the Muscle, that I had once listened to a BookTuber do a review of the novel, which was based on which Get Carter was adapted into.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a particular line that this BookTuber read out of Jack Carter beating somebody until his fist was slick.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
in that fight scene, I read the particular line in yours. I read, and that came back to me.
Yeah.
So I could see sort of the Ted Lewis influence there.
Yeah, I think that was. I think I only noticed that after I'd written it.
Yeah.
And I remember that because I can remember that line as well from that book. Some of his books are filled with some great lines anyway, Ted Lewis's stuff, especially the Jack Carter novels. And yeah, so it was my little nod to Ted Lewis, and I hope he didn't mind, sort of as such.
Yeah. One thing about the if you look at the front cover, you get the idea that it's just about a man fighting, and by that, but it's not that really, is it? It's more than just that. It's about his sort of the effect, the idea of having the fights the effect of having the fight on him, and him training for it, and it affecting other parts of his life.
Yeah, and I think that kind of came in. So when I first started writing it, it was probably, I think I was still in the army at the time, so that would have been, I think the first short story would have been written around about 2012, perhaps. So that first 15-page one, and it was quite. Here's the feud. They arranged the fight. I think the whole run up to the fight was perhaps covered in about a page, maybe a page and a half, and then we were just into the fight at the end, and that was that. But then when I revisited it, and I thought to myself, right, I'm actually going to try and do something with this now, and write it and publish it. and then started looking at more of the, thinking back to the 90s and drawing all those sort of influences back in there, it did start to go into a bit more of the sort of psychological side of things. And Frankie Collins is not necessarily this kind of superhuman individual. He's a normal guy. He's a working man. He's worked hard for what he's got, wants to keep hold of that. And I just started to think, well, what would be all the normal pressures that would be on somebody facing something like that? And I don't think the pressures that Frankie's facing, I think most men will probably go through something similar to that in their lives. It might not be a gangster that they've got to fight in a week's time or something like that, but it might well be, a bill that's coming up, a family illness, a job task or pressure that's going on there. So I think all these kind of things sort of built into it. It became quite natural to just write it as I was going on, to think, yeah, well, he would start having problems with his missus, for example.
Yeah.
He would start doubting himself. He would start worrying what people are thinking, what would be the consequences if he lost, and all the rest of it. It all just sort of fell into place there. So yeah, it's I like to think, without sort of sounding kind of like too sort of pretentious or artsy fartsy or anything like that, it is more just about, it's probably more of a character piece than just an action sort of thriller as well. But hopefully the action's still in there to satisfy people.
Yeah. Oh, definitely is. Were the characters based on anybody in particular you knew, or are they just ones that you've invented?
They're probably largely invented, but you're definitely inspired by, I suppose, Frankie's a bit of a composite of several individuals that I knew. I don't have a background sort of working on the doors or anything like that. I knew a couple of bouncers just to kind of speak to, just to chat to on nights out and so on. And then there were some other sort of mates that I had that were very much cut from the same sort of cloth as a Frankie Collins, if you like. Good sort of hard-working, decent blokes, if you like, but they were also quite tough and able to kind of look after themselves and look after their friends and so on. So some of those aspects of, I suppose, like the hard work, the facing the problems head on that you've got, those kind of attitudes are probably drawn on those individuals. And there's probably a little bit of this guy over here, a little bit of that guy, kind of brought into the whole of Frankie Collins. And the rest is sort of made up, if you like.
Yeah. One thing I did notice when I was reading it, there's a lot about obviously being a bouncer and set up, covering the clubs. As you said, you don't have a background in that. So is that just stuff that you, as you said, picked up when you were in the clubs, or from people who worked in there, or did you have to do a bit more research in it?
Yeah, I think some of it there was little bits that were kind of picked up on from sort of going out back in the kind of, like, I suppose, like the sort of mid to late 90s, early 2000s, if you like, on those clubs and knowing those people. Little stories that you'd hear now and then, little things that you'd see, little conversations that you'd have with people just chatting, because they will tell you this sort of stories if you kind of listen sometimes to them. And then other elements were probably going back again to the 90s with that whole interest that there was in the British crime scene at the time. Do you remember a documentary called The Cook Report at all? Do you remember that? I don't know, Roger Cook, investigative reporter.
Is that the gentleman who people used to break the microphone over his head? Is that the one?
I think, yeah. He'd doorstop them. He'd go and doorstop them with a camera crew, and they'd either run, or you'd see a fist fly out into the camera and he'd go flying and so on. So he was doing a lot of these sort of programs as well at that time. And there were a couple where he'd interviewed various kind of people on that sort of scene who told these stories. And a lot of those stuck in my head. And I thought, oh, that's perfect. Just to bring those back. This is how it was sort of working at that kind of time. And even though Muscle's not set in the 90s, but apart from the one reference, I think, that's in the novella about Instagram, it very well could be, really set in that sort of time.
Yeah. Were any of the Guy Ritchie films an influence in any way?
I really like the Guy Ritchie films. I really do. I think he's quite underrated and ignored as such as a director in many ways. I don't think any of his stuff was a direct influence on Muscle. as such. I think, if anything, it was probably some of the British television drama that was being produced in the kind of 80s, 90s, that was on there. One that I would say was a big influence just in terms of tone and how it was approached. A film called The Firm with Gary Oldman about the football hooligans. Yeah. So that was a big influence on me, just the writing style of that and the way that they approached the characters and the way that you had that mixture of the sort of domestic side of his life and then the hooligan side of his life. And I like that approach to it, along with the sort of likes of the dramas written by Jimmy McGovern.
Oh yeah.
Back in the day, good solid sort of writer who'd look at this, very, very nuanced sort of writer in many ways. If you look back at some of his stuff now that he'd written, you think, it's quite ahead of his time in many ways, I think. So I think those were a lot of the influences there, when the BBC actually used to make some really good stuff that was actually let you think for yourself and just presented the characters as they were doing what they were doing, and it said, you make your mind up whether you think this is acceptable or not, and you go away and think about it. So unlike a lot of the stuff they do now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really do see that with The Firm. That was written and directed by Alan Clark.
Yeah.
And, if you think about one of them, two of them about Northern Ireland, Contact, which is about
yes,
if you've seen that one, and also Elephant. I don't think you could get them made on the BBC today because they'd just be too, particularly Elephant, which is really powerful. I think because it's, for those who've not seen it, it's about Northern Ireland and it's showing a series of murders. It's obviously set during the Troubles, but it's never identified who the gunmen are and who the victims are. It just shows the senselessness of the sectarian violence there. But to modern day BBC, they wouldn't put that on. They deband something. It made clear which one's which, and you almost certainly know that the perpetrators wouldn't be members of the IRA. They'd be the other side.
I'll have to look for that. I've not seen Elephant. I've seen Contact. I thought that's fantastic.
Yeah.
For pretty much dialogue free, isn't it? For long stretches of it, there's hardly any dialogue in there. Did Alan Clark do Made in Britain as well with Tim Roth? Was that?
Yes,
Alan
he did.
Clark?
Yeah.
That's another great drama. Again, I couldn't imagine that ever being made today, or Scum for that matter.
Yeah.
So I think all those ones, that kind of style, that Alan Clark type stuff, was absolutely an influence on me. But I'll have a look for Elephant. I'll keep an eye out for that. See if I can find that anywhere.
I think it might be on YouTube,
and
I think I saw Contact on YouTube as well.
Right, that's worth watch again
then. Just to continue on the influence, was James Ellroy any influence on you in terms of his stuff, or was it mainly British?
I think it was. I think Ellroy. I like Ellroy's kind of that the series of. I'm trying to think which is it the American. It's the American tabloid Cold 6000 and Bloods Are Over series. That's
Underworld USA.
Underworld USA. Yeah, that's a great series. I think that was, that's fantastic. And LA Confidential, when I first read that was a big influence just in terms of writing style. Is that very quick style of writing that he's got that's so kind of visually, how he packs so much on a page is unreal. And that mixture between I suppose almost the story side and the kind of documentary side of things, where you'd have the teletypes, the surveillance logout excerpts, and so on, newspaper articles. I think he was an influence in terms of perhaps style or tone. Just that kind of warts and all tone. This is what it is. These are who these people are. Ellroy didn't sugarcoat any of it, did he, in terms of his characters at all? It's just they do what they do, they say what they say. It's I think what's he quoted as saying? Something like, "I write about bad guys doing bad things," or something like that. I think he might have been quoted as saying once. But no real kind of moral judgment on it. Just there you go, you make your own mind up with it. And I think that was it for Muscle in terms of the Ellroy influence. and I know when I have chatted to people who I know who've read it, like perhaps friends who've read it, you sometimes get some distinct perspectives on Frankie Collins. Of some people view him as quite, he's a decent enough sort of guy. Other people have said like, well, he's a menace. He got what he deserved and all the rest of it, that sort of thing. So to have that differing points of view, I think I must have at least halfway succeeded in just presenting the character and saying, you make your mind up what you think about him with it.
Yeah, and the reason when I was reading it, I was thinking, you have somewhat brought this upon yourself, because he could simply have just ignored Warren, but but then he's the one that essentially, when Warren calls him up, he's the one saying, "Let's have a fight." That story. Whilst when I was reading, I felt very sympathetic towards Frankie Collins, but at the same time, I was thinking, this is somewhat your own fault.
Yeah. That's I suppose my view on it is that kind of. Well, I don't really want to say what my view on it is, because I don't want it to influence anybody else sort of reading it and what they think. But I think that's great, just having that response from it, where you sit there and think, well, you probably could have done something a bit different there, mate. Something. Or equally, just like, no, you should have done it sooner. A bit like his mate Steve saying, no, you need to get on and sort this out. So there's definitely different points of view coming out from reading that book, which I'm sort of quite happy with.
And was Muscle the first thing that you'd ever tried writing, or had you been writing stuff before?
I've been writing since probably since at school. I think at school was the first time I started writing. I say seriously, probably around about the age of 14, something like that, 13, 14. When you're getting into secondary school and actually setting your creative writing assignments in English language classes and so on. So I've always written over that time. I drifted in and out of it, I suppose, as you sort of move into the world of work and you get other distractions like drinking and going out and stuff like that. That sort of, all the writing goes to one side. But I've constantly written things, even if I've never published it. So I think Muscle was I had a short story published years back in a small press magazine. But Muscle, I think, was the first significant thing that I published. When I just decided, I think it was, since 2020 it was published. And we've gone through the various lockdowns and everything that was going on back then. I was on furlough. I can remember sort of thinking at one point, the writing's on the wall here, I'm probably going to get made redundant. And I think it just led to a little bit of a kind of reevaluation and think, well, if you're going to write something and get it published now, just go and do it, So I think that's where that came from there, of just actually finally looking at self-publishing and Kindle, because I think up until that point, I hadn't really looked much about self-publishing at all. My ideas of self-publishing were still the old model of, you get the whole, you get yourself 2,000 copies or whatever printed out, and you have to store them somewhere at home until you can flog them, and that's that. So when I actually looked into KDP and thought, oh, it's free. You just need an Amazon account, which you already had. It's fairly straightforward. You use their platform. There's no print on demand. There's no costs. Well, why not do it? And I think I got to that point where it's like, yeah, let's just get this done. Had a look around, found Muscle, because that had been kind of ticking over still. Started rewriting it as such, and then it just grew into the novella that it is now, as opposed to the kind of 15-page sort of short story as such. And then just like bang, published, and that was that. And that's I think that attitude of just get it done, get it out there. That's why there's like this inconsistency with my name between the cover of the book and Twitter and so on, Twitter handle and stuff, because it was like I didn't even think about Twitter or anything before publishing it. Then when it came to, I suppose you better get a Twitter account for this.
Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna have to. Yeah, I'll just drop the H. That'll do. That'll simplify that and just get the account. So I'll just go back and change it on KDP. But you can't do that once you've published something. You can't change the author name or the title. So I was like, all right, it's going to look like I don't even know how to spell my own name now. Brilliant, sort of thing. So,
so going on from that about the self-publishing, how have you found the self-publishing, the process itself? Was it difficult, or was it just something that seemed straightforward when you were doing it?
I'd say it seemed fairly straightforward when I did it at the time. I think if I remember rightly with it, I think I self-published it on a weekend or something like that, on a weekend evening. Once you've got the kind of niff-naff of actually setting up your account sorted with the, I think you put in your bank account details, some tax information and so on. Once that's done, I found that probably the most kind of difficult part of it, if you like, or the bit that was a bit of a pain just to mess around with. But in terms of, and then there was obviously a few issues with the formatting where I hadn't set the margins properly. So half the text was running off the page or something. You upload it, you look at it, I've got to do it again, go back in, change it. But it's all, it's like first world problems, isn't it? That sort of thing. It's, not a massive issue. But the actual uploading of it, I think the first version of it was just an ebook. And I just used an Amazon cover for that. So I didn't even design any cover with it. It was just used a stock, I think it was a stock photograph of a boxer that was on Amazon, put on there, muscle, Jon Davies, bang, upload, gone. And then I got an email back saying it's live within, I think, a couple of hours. And that was a big sort of, oh wow, you quickly log on to Amazon. Is it there? Where is it? Quick search, and just to see something that you've created on a platform like Amazon is like, wow, that's pretty easy, that. And then I end up sort of kicking myself because you think, why don't you do it sooner? What were you doing? It's so easy. It's so easy to do now. I think self-publishing. I think perhaps selling the books and so on, and maybe making a living out of it. That's a different issue. That's a completely different sort of story, perhaps. And I think all the marketing side of it. Again, I'd say that's something that anybody can learn to do. There's plenty of free resources out there, but it's probably something that takes a little bit more time to put into, and maybe more investment, just in money and time and effort that you have to do. But my attitude at the time, I think my attitude still is really just get it out there. Just get the book out there. It will find a life of its own. In many ways, I sort of believe that it's, there are physical copies of this now knocking around somewhere in the UK, at least, that are probably, hopefully, finding their way to someone else. Someone's lent it to somebody else. Someone's put it in a charity shop. Someone's left it. I left a couple of copies in a, one of those sort of free book library things that you see in phone boxes and so on. I put a couple of copies in a few of them, and walked past one the other day. It wasn't there anymore. So unless somebody's just nicked it to throw it at somebody or something like that, then but it's out there. Someone's hopefully reading it and enjoying it, and it will be passed on. So it's got a life of its own, really. So, but yeah, I'd certainly recommend self-publishing to anybody, really, just in terms of the opportunity it gives you to write the story you want to write, the way you want to write it. First person, third person, past tense, present tense, experimental, non-linear, whatever you want to do with it, whatever genre you want to do, the freedom's there for you, without any of the kind of gatekeeping that seems to go on with traditional publishing. And you can at least say it's there, even if you just wanted to write your book and just get a couple of hard copies for yourself, because that's what prompted me to do the hard copy version. Was I'm a bit of a Luddite. I don't have a Kindle. I don't really like reading online. I like physical books. And I sort of sat there one day after, it was probably about a month or two after doing Muscle, thinking, I've not actually got a copy for myself. I can't even read this myself and it's finished product, because it's just online. It's an ebook. So that's when I decided to do the print version as well. But even if you wanted to just do that, just so you could do that, KDP at least offers you that opportunity. You can just publish your book, run off a couple of author copies, and there you go. You've got this physical book, this memento, if you don't even want to sell it,
Yeah, and I do wonder sometimes with sort of all the self-published authors who I've interacted with on Twitter particularly, if the mainstream publishing industry would actually go into any of their books.
Yeah.
There's sort of the natural sort of self-censorship of. I did in my last interview with Ian Montague. He pointed out to me that with the mainstream publishers, they'll have these sort of three big authors who will be the one who make the money for them,
Yeah.
and everybody else is just small fry, and so they're not particularly interested with the small fry to go particularly push the envelope. And
No.
a lot of the authors that I can think of, whether it be yourself, Steve Stark, Richard Nichols, Nick Hovith, who writes Stage, that's it, J.L. Engel. Their books I've not I've read Richard and Steve's book, but with the others I haven't read them. But from what I've read about them and heard about them, I don't think they get published mainstream. Publishing is the way for them to really get that out there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, and yeah, I think that's kind of what I've sort of the bit I don't know a lot about traditional publishing, because it seems like they keep it all quite close to the chest anyway, but you hear the odd little bit now and then, and that idea that it is this kind of handful of best-selling authors that are cross-subsidizing all the rest of their output seems to be the thing. Or the I think it's called the backlist, which is like your authors like your Ian Flemings, your Agatha Christie's, that just keep these companies going. So again, there is zero interest in taking a chance anymore on any new authors, so it would seem. But if you do think, that the authors that you mentioned there, Steve Stark, Richard Nichols, Nick Horvath, and J.L. Engel, I've got their books here actually. You don't mind me showing your viewers, just in case anybody's not aware of them.
In fact, if there's any other authors you want to bring up,
yeah. So I mean, if you've not read these yet, you'll love Sledge. This is,
I'm going to plan to read that sometime before the end of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic action thriller, bordering on horror in some aspects of it, but fantastic book. Again, I'll just show you these up here just to sort of. Dangerous Man by J.L. Engel. Again, another great sort of action-packed thriller. Very much in the sort of vein of a kind of Taken or that kind of 24 type aspect to it. Really good, great action hero. Richard Nichols, obviously you've read that and seen his interviews with it. This took me back to the kind of 90s as well, where the sort of thrillers that were always being published, it seemed, the likes of Frederick Forsyth, Wilbur Smith, your Jack Higgins, Clive Cussler. And then obviously got the man himself, Steve Stark.
Yes.
With his ones, that's absolutely one of my which one? Oh, that way. Absolutely one of my favorite horror novels. Again, that took me back to the sort of the heyday of the 80s and 90s horror. Fantastic book. And a great set of short stories there, easily a rival to the sort of the stuff that you saw Clive Barker writing back in the day. Fantastic collection.
I'm planning to buy Violent Ends at the beginning of next month and read it in November. So I'm looking forward to that.
It's great, and hopefully you'll get the one with the new cover, because he's just released a new cover for it as well. So that's it. Another author, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Stephen Jay Goulds.
No, I've not.
So he's on the list to read more of his stuff. He's quite active on Twitter as well. He co-runs the Punk Noir small press.
Okay.
As well. So this is a great little, really sort of lean, mean noir thriller set in the 50s in Hawaii about an ex Boston mob gangster who gets drawn into dealing with a Korean mobster and stuff. So definitely worth have a look at that. And then another one who he's not as active on Twitter anymore, but this one that I've sort of read of his, Undone Valley by William Solden. A kind of very gritty, set in Ohio, kind of like a Rust Belt thriller. Yeah, I don't know if you sort of, it reminded me a little bit of, or when I saw the film, it reminded me of this book more, Out of the Furnace with Christian Bale. Seen that one? Kind of set in these kind of rundown sort of mill towns. And yeah, this is about an ex-convict that gets out, and then a young man who's kind of after him for revenge of something that he did when he's younger. But very good book. Again, I don't think he's as active on Twitter anymore as he used to be. So, but really good. But going back to your point there of talking about these authors, all these authors we sort of mentioned there wouldn't really get a look in today's publishing, but they absolutely would have done if you'd have gone back sort of 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
You know, the sort of the kind of stuff that you see in there with Sledge or Richard Nichols' book, like I said, that's on par with the likes of Wilbur Smith, Clive Cussler. You know, you would have easily seen that sort of book written or being published by the mainstream 20, 30 years ago. Steve Stark stuff would have easily been championed by the mainstream 20, 30 years ago. So I think it's just changed. You know, we're now the sort of, you know, it seems that indie's the way to go if you do want to do these kind of, well, what are seen as challenging books really now, or at least not books that perhaps follow the narrative, or perhaps align to certain ways of thinking, maybe. But so I was just going to put those books back. I'm you know, I sort of struggle to try and identify exactly what is the issue with traditional publishing as such. And I think maybe it is just a cost thing. Like you've mentioned there, you know, they're relying on a very small sort of pool to bring some things in, and the rest of us, really, there's just not enough of the money to go around, and not enough of the opportunities to go around, perhaps, to sort of bring on new writers or to take that chance. And I can kind of get it from a point of view of as an employee or as a contractor of a publishing house. You know, if you're the agent and the editor and you take a chance on this book and it doesn't go anywhere, you've probably only got maybe one more chance to take before you're out the door, mate. So I get it from that point of view, but it's a sad state of affairs for the kind of creative industries overall if they're not looking at these different groups of people.
Yeah, it's as you say with Steve's book, you can imagine that being published alongside, say, Sean Hudson.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
James Herbert is, I think he died about 10 years ago, so he's not being published. But Sean Hudson's still going. Yeah, obviously he's still there because he's one of those sort of big names that can draw people in.
Yeah,
whereas Steve might not necessarily be able to. And it also seems there's an element of not wanting to publish certain stuff. It's more than just the economic side, because I remember there was this article that came out a couple of weeks ago now, and I mentioned it in the interview with Steve, the one that said, "Why don't men read novels anymore?"
Yeah.
And that one, you can just tell that what they actually wanted to say was, "Why don't men read novels?
Yeah. Why don't they read these books we want them to read? You know, why won't they?" I know it was. I think I did waste a bit of time reading that article. So I thought, right, I'll read it. I'll give it a chance. But it was just, you know, again, I think if it's the same article, I think they were berating men for reading certain books, and I think it was a lot of people going into the kind of more the sort of self-help, not self-help, but the kind of I suppose like non-fiction, sort of self-development type stuff. And they were saying, "Oh, why are they reading this stuff, and why don't you take the chance on this book about whatever, you know, that we're now pushing forward?" And I mean, I struggle to. I think I've probably brought over the last couple of years, I've perhaps bought maybe 3 or 4 new books from a high street bookshop that have been traditionally published, and I believe most of those are from older writers anyway.
Yeah,
either people that have been around on the scene for a little while, or writers who've perhaps been around for a while but only now just coming into sort of prominence as such. But in terms of like a lot of the new authors, you know, I kind of sit there, I go into Waterstones and look at the new titles, and I'm just, you know, pick it up. No. Yeah, that's you just literally just looking at these things, then kind of right. I know I'll go back to the alphabetical section and just see if I can pick something that's a bit older that I've always wanted to read for a while. But the newer stuff is, I do tend to find it's through indie, and it's through channels like yours or Twitter that you're hearing about these new these new books that are out there, because there is a lot. There's so many books being published now. So, but I found that Twitter and YouTube have been a bit of a very useful kind of tool of just sort of recommending different books to me. I used to get all my book recommends back in the late 90s. I used to read, get the Sunday Times, like you get the culture supplement, and there'd be all sorts of books in there that you could recommend, you pick up, and they'd be good. I haven't done that for at least 20 years now. I haven't taken a recommendation from a sort of mainstream outlet for years now.
Yeah, and indie and self-published stuff is now of a high quality. It genuinely is.
Yeah.
In most cases, especially the ones I've read so far, they've been a cut above of most of the stuff that's been traditionally published. And I think that's going to become more noticeable as we go on, especially now that that sort of stereotype about self-publishing of it being vanity publishing.
Yeah.
That it just the crap is churned out, which is not true anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that I've heard watching some interviews with other self-published authors that the mainstream publishing industry is starting to wake up to the fact, and they're starting to take some notice. And I know with my previous interview with Ian Montague, he mentioned the fact that he thinks what's going to happen is that the traditional publishers are going to watch the self-publishing market and then just start picking authors.
Yeah.
Adding them onto their roster.
Yeah. You can sort of see that going sometimes when you kind of read the odd little bits here and there, and see when you do hear the kind of when you manage to get that peek behind the curtain of what's going on every now and then. And it does seem that they will look for things like they look for things like follow accounts for a start. But right, how popular are you on Twitter? Okay, can we then can we obviously capitalize on the audience that's already there? But I think there've been these stories before, hasn't there, of these authors that have been kind of plucked from the self-publishing area, like is it Andy Weir who did The Martian?
Yeah.
And I think was it 50 Shades of Grey? Was that a self-published one originally, and then that got picked up, or Twilight? One of those two, maybe. Not that I read 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight, just to make clear about that. That's just from stuff that I've heard. That's it. So I think it will go forward, and people like Nick Horvath, J.L. Engel, Richard Nichol, Steve Stark, they're absolutely right to be plucked up by these big name publishers. Absolutely right to, because you almost think, why wouldn't you do it? What's the risk to you? You've already got some kind of proof, if you like, of concept or of competence in terms of writing, because the book's there, you can read it. You don't have to necessarily take, you can see the reviews. You can at least do a little bit of that filtering through from their perspective. Whether they'll do it or not is another matter, or whether we'll see, whether we'll see these authors now, whether, I don't know, we'll see them whether we'll see these authors then change some of the writing style as they go through, perhaps from the editorial perspective or not. I don't really know. I would imagine that, I can imagine that there is perhaps pressure on authors as well within traditional publishing to sort of shape the book and maybe shape some of the characters and maybe some of the outcomes of the story to fit a certain acceptable kind of trail, perhaps, or maybe even perhaps to extend that into their own kind of public facing persona, maybe through Twitter and so on. So where that, I don't know if that happens, but I can imagine it's perhaps the case. So whether they'll, I don't, whether that'll work with all these, these rough, tough, self-published indie authors that we sort of just mentioned there. I can't see them changing their ways to fit in. They'll just go like, stick it. I'll carry on doing what I'm doing.
I can just imagine if they try to get Richard Nichols to do that.
Right, Richard, we want you to put this this tweet out, please. Just to show you solidarity for whatever cause it is. You can imagine, can't you? Yeah, picture that.
just to as we come to the end of the interview, I'd just like to talk a bit about the sort of community on Twitter that exists, because
Mm.
there's a lot of self-published authors there. In fact, this is how I found I actually found it through Richard Nichols' YouTube channel.
Yeah, yeah,
You were interviewed on there. Steve Stark was interviewed
yeah,
on there. Quite a number of other authors. In fact, when I decided to do my indie author or self-published indie book a month, I just started by going through all the interviews on Richard's
yeah,
channel,
yeah,
and then I found on Twitter, and they were all this huge number of self-published authors
yeah.
who are helping each other. And there's also some channels. One big one I can think of is Bald and Balding, which is Mike Molman and Ro Bushy, and they're two self-published
Right.
authors who um, run this channel, and they interview self-published authors. They've done quite a few of them. They've been
Oh,
going
I love that.
since the beginning of this year, I think.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
one. And there's also Beard of Darkness and
Yes, yeah,
on YouTube. And there's quite a few other YouTube channels that do this, and so I think that really does help with
yeah,
the self-published authors.
absolutely. And it's I mean, I'm not a great sort of Twitter user at all. I sort of have my moments where I'll kind of come on for a little while, then I'll just drop out of sight for a bit, and I'll sort of come back to it again. That's the sort of Luddite in me that's not particularly sort of liking the technology, but it's a great sort of community of, you know, that little corner that we all seem to be in at the minute on Twitter.
Yeah.
Is a really positive and really good little group of people there. You know, everybody will promote people's works. You know, there's I've seen other areas. It's sort of observing. There's definitely some other areas of the kind of the writer space in Twitter, especially in the sort of genre spaces, let's say, that are a bit more kind of like backbiting, it seems, and not perhaps as positive. You know, there's always some sort of drama kicking off in there, it seems. So I feel very fortunate to kind of be associated with some of the people that you've mentioned there, and yourself, and people like Steve and Nick and Richard, because it's all very, very, very positive. And there's a lot more. There's always someone else coming in as well. So I've got my list of books to read now is just like, right, there's another one add to the list. I've already got a stack that I've got to get through now, and I've just keep, you know, buying and buying and buying. So, but it's a nice problem to have, you know, finding all these great new authors and great new books out there.
Yeah, it also helps me with what I'm going to do each pick for next year.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got up to February, but then and that means I've got another 10 months to another 10 books to choose from. So all I've got to do is now go on to Twitter.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just
go on to your tweets and then find them. What advice would you give to somebody who was thinking of starting in self-publishing?
I think the biggest, I suppose it's going to sound like, oh yeah, duh, obviously, sort of thing. But the biggest thing is just do it. Just finish whatever it is that you're writing to start off with. Just, you know, get it done. Write what you want to write, the way you want to write it. You know, don't do it with any kind of like fear or favor. You know, don't think about what other people are going to think about it as you're writing it, or even to a point, even is it going to be commercial enough? Is it going to be likable enough? You know, just write what you want to write and just get it out there. Just get it done. You know, I wouldn't recommend doing perhaps the completely kind of slapshod approach that I did, which would just smash it out there. But I think that's the most important thing, is to just get it out there.
Yeah.
I know there's lots of talk about if you really wanted a book to succeed, you're probably better off having a bit more of a plan, and actually maybe a bit of a marketing one to begin with, maybe some free chapters and so on, or free, you know, some excerpts to sort of build a bit of an audience, you know, use Twitter to build a bit of an audience, and then have the launch and then launch your book. And I think that's all great if you want to do that approach. But I think it's just most important, just get something done, because that will give you the momentum then to maybe look at other things and carry on writing. And you can always go back and change things, especially on KDP. You know, you can update your cover. If you don't have a cover, or you don't have the money to pay a cover designer, you can use free platforms like Canva just to get a cover on there. You can use one off Amazon. You just print it off with a plain black cover for now. You know, whatever. Just get it done, get it out there, and it exists. Then it exists in the real world, and it will find its life. And then you can go back and right, I'll do a bit more marketing for it. I'll do a new cover. I'll tweak it now and then. As long as you're sort of happy with what's going out, as in it's written the way you want to write it. It's done to the best of your ability in terms of formatting, spelling, all the rest of it. However it is that you've decided to write it, whatever style that you decide to write it with. Do a good enough job on it. Get it out there. Send a couple of WhatsApp messages or text to your mates and your friends and family. Let them know it's out there and ask them to buy one. Put a tweet out, go. And that's it. And then just kind of build it as it's going along. Just let it build as it's, rather than sit there and think, well, I've not got a cover. I don't know enough about marketing. I haven't built an audience. I've only got 2 Twitter followers. Whatever. These are just kind of, don't let that put you off publishing something, especially when it's so freely available, and it's so, just get it done. Do the rest afterwards if you need to, but just get the work, get whatever it is finished. Write it, the thing that you want to write, not what you think someone else wants to read, because it will find somebody out there will want to read it. I think no matter how niche or strange or unusual you might think your work is, it will connect with somebody out there. So just get it out there and get it done.
Yeah, I think it's with YouTube. I once heard somebody say that if your channel is niche, you'll get an audience.
Yeah,
because there's going to be a group of people who are going to find that interesting, even if the vast majority of other people won't, and they will stick with you and support you all the way through.
Absolutely. And I think, like you're doing now, your sort of channel exists. It's out there. These videos are out there. They've reached people. They've seen them. They've influenced people. They've informed people. They've entertained people. That's reward in itself, isn't it? As such as and the same with a book. Just get it out there. It's going to connect with somebody. That's the reward in itself, I think, for any kind of creative endeavor like this.
And just to end with a final question, and I should say the audience, this is the final question. Are you going to write a sequel? Is there a sequel in the works to Muscle at all? Or
yes, there is. Yeah. It's coming along slowly but surely, but it seems to go in these big sort of spurts of like, right, I'm making progress, then nothing, then we're going on. But I'm actually getting there a little bit further now. So I've just been working on a bit of it this week. I won't say exactly what it's about as such, but it picks up shortly in the aftermath of the novella. So it sort of pretty much follows on from the immediate aftermath and the effects that the feud with Warren has had on everybody, and then obviously the consequences of kind of what's happened in the first part. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into it and going back to some of those characters as well and explore it, maybe going a bit deeper into those characters. The only thing I will say is that this one's told from the perspective of Steve, Frankie's second in command. So Steve's now the main character in this one. And I'll just leave it at that for now. Because also I don't want to just say too much in case I get to a point it's like, no, I'm changing it. It's going to be completely different.
Well, I'm going to bring the interview to an end there. Thank you, Jon, for coming on. And
thank you.
When you do get that your sequel action ready, I will read it, and I'd love to have you back on to talk about that.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me on today. I've really enjoyed our chat today. It's been great.
It's been great as well. It's been a real pleasure.
All right.
So with that, BookTube, I'll just say goodbye, and I will see you later.